community and how to work together. It's invaluable. The way you link it into Torah, and thank you for being my rabbis. I'm also going to talk about building community from a little bit of a different angle. We learned that we each have a responsibility to play. We each have a puzzle piece that when we put it all together, we become one team, one TBI. I'll talk about it a little more at the macro level. The Bnei Yisrael in Genesis are the children of the man named Israel, but the Bnei Yisrael in Exodus, they're the Israelites. At some point, they transform from a group of individuals into one coherent, somewhat coherent nation. And the commentators say that the gap, that what happened in the middle, was their pain that they went through in Egypt. That through the pain, they learned who they were. They discovered that they were the Bnei Yisrael, the Israelites. Once they discovered that, they were able to receive the Torah, which was their guiding, their mission statement, that they would eventually, 40 years later, coalesce around to enter into the promised land. Now, this is the path that communities need to take to become sacred communities, to become united, but it doesn't give us a lot to know how. That's just what we're going to end up doing. But to know how we need to do it, we turn to an individual in the Torah whose story of developing, of finding out who he was, we have a little bit more of a breakdown. Moses. Moses is born a Hebrew. He's put into the river and he's picked up. He becomes an Egyptian. He's family of the Hebrew slaves, but he's also raised as an Egyptian nobleman. And at some point, he doesn't know, is he more Hebrew or is he more Egyptian? So he goes out to his sea, and there's a certain verse in particular that captures the difference between his identities. It says, "Vayihi bayamim ahem vayigdal Moshe vayetzeh elecha vayar besivlotam vayar ish mitzri makeh ish ivri me'echav." The word me'echav from his kin is repeated. Sometime after that, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his kinsfolk and he witnessed their labors. We don't know whether me'echav refers to the Egyptians. He's witnessing his kinsfolk as they, the other people, the Hebrews, are laboring. And then he sees an Egyptian man beating a Hebrew, me'echav, one of his kinsmen. Is one of his kinsmen modifying the Hebrew man who is being beat? Or is this verse to be read, he saw an Egyptian man beating beating an Israelite, one of his kinsmen beating an Israelite? It's confusing. So what does he do? He needs to make a decision who he is. He's got two values that are going up against each other. He looks around. Vayafen ko v'cho, vayar ki en ish, vayachet hamitzri v'yitmeneu b'cho. He turned this way and that way, and he sees there's nobody to tell him who he is, what he's supposed to do. Do you stand up for the Israelite, or do you look away and let the Egyptian do what he wants? He needs to be the one to make the decision. Now, TBI has felt pain. We can get to the promised land, but we need to make sure that we're rallying around a common mission. To rally around the common mission, we also have to figure out who we are first. And it's often going to take looking left and looking right, checking out maybe if outside organizations can help us focus, or that's not going to be our solution. The solution is pitting our priorities against each other, the Egyptian side of ourselves, the Israelite side of ourselves. And choosing. Moses chooses Israelite. It's the right call. He's made the leader of our people, of his people. It's also a painful one. He goes into exile for many years. When we make calls, we have certain values, and when our values go against each other and we prioritize one or another, that will lead to some pain. It will lead to some strife. Growing pains are real. But it's important in figuring out mi anochi, which is exactly what Moses says when God appoints him as the leader of the Hebrews. He says, mi anochi, who am I? Who am I to lead these Israelites? I figured out who I am right now. Who am I going to be so that I can actually merit this incredible position? Now, not to get overly theological, but that's the same thing that God says. When Moses says, okay, God, I'll go to the Israelites and tell them, that you sent me, who do I say sent me? Who is giving me this call? God says, yeah, sure, yeah. I will be that I will be. It's important to know who we are now. We know who we are now. We're a multi-generational, intergenerational community with talented service leaders who can put on an entirely lay-led service. We have volunteers who stuff envelopes, who plan programs, who spend hours after hours cooking and preparing and putting away food and making sure all of our programs happen as they should. We're a community that cares so deeply that we're going to brave the look outside. It's freezing outside. Why'd you come today? It's unbelievable. TBI cares about its community. That's who we are. Who we will be, I don't know. It's through the difficult challenges, through the decisions that we need to make. Do we strike down the Egyptian side of ourselves and prioritize the Israelite side of ourselves? And in this case, I'm not saying Egyptian as a pejorative term. Later, Yitro and his daughters refer to Moses as that Egyptian, and it doesn't seem to be done in a negative way. We all have certain values that we care about, and we need to make sure that we're continuously evaluating which one is more important. Here's an example of how this plays out in real life. I knew who I was on October 13th, 2023. I had a good idea of my sense of self. But when we had Rena, that's her birthday. When we had Rena, I needed to know who I will be as a father. We needed to know what we wanted Rena to turn into. Well, we want her to be independent. We want her to be strong, to be able to make decisions for herself, to be confident. We also need her to be safe. So in our decisions now, we've got a child-proof house. We want to watch her. But I know if I'm doing everything for her, she's never going to learn to do things on her own. But also if she encounters something I didn't foresee the danger, is she going to get hurt? Now, however much we're prioritizing her safety right now over her independence at 1.5 years, that's obviously going to change when she gets to 15, when she gets to 18, when she gets to 32, and so on, right? Who we are now is not necessarily who we will be in the future. It's the way that we make the decisions that transforms us, the projects we engage in that determine who we will be. At Shabbat services, for example, at the synagogue, we value spirited congregational participation and singing, and we also value praying in a beautiful space in honor of Shabbat in our community. So when we decide, are we holding services in the sanctuary, or are we holding services in the chapel, we know we're giving up one for the other. Choosing the sanctuary over the chapel means we're embracing the beauty, with the majesty, the glorious glass-stained windows. And it's a little bit of a bigger space. The intimacy of the chapel elevates the spirituality of the space, but choosing the chapel means that we're prioritizing the singing and the participation at the expense of this gorgeous sanctuary. There's no right answer to these questions. There's only an answer that is based on our values and how we prioritize them in the moment, knowing that the decision we make today is not necessarily the decision we're going to make tomorrow. Now, when Moses made his decision, it was the right one. He became the leader, and he suffered for it. But he was not in his final form when he became the leader of the Israelites. His primary job was communication, and he had a speech issue. That's a pretty significant issue for somebody whose job is communicating the message of God. And yet, he worked on his weaknesses, and he turned them into a strength, becoming the man who ended up delivering speeches that we now know as the 5th book of the Bible, the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. He never reached the promised land himself. We will always have room to grow. There will always be something else we need to accomplish and to work on. And this is a process. Of course, it's a process that we can't do as individuals. Because if everyone right now were to stand up, turn around 3 times, and take 20 steps forward, you'd probably trip over the seats, but you'd also be in completely different directions. It's important that we remain on the same page. Now, here's a fun anecdote to tell you about the importance of remaining on the same page, but also how we can make sure we do it. I worked at Camp Ramah for 2 summers. This happens to be Rabbi Jacob's fault. I worked at Camp Ramah for 2 summers. He introduced me to Yael, who was recruiting, and they were great summers. Here's a story of something that happened before I even started. In about, mid-late April, I get a phone call saying, hey, just want to remind you, you need to send in your physical by May 1st. I'm like, physical? What are you talking about? I didn't know that I have to do a physical. She pointed to an email that she had sent me that I had missed about a physical. okay, I'll get the physical done by May 1st. So I call around and I find a doctor who has an appointment for April 26th. We're cutting it close. So on the phone, the woman named Stacy says, yes, I think we can get the documents in on time. Just make sure that you're here before the start of the day. Come at 8:45. Our day starts at 9. We'll fill out the paperwork. You'll be good to go. Everything will be set. I want to double check they have my insurance. So I said, hey, by the way, do you take Humana? He says, yeah. Just come on in on April 26th and make sure you're here by 8:45. April 26th comes. I show up at this huge empty Beverly Hills parking lot, completely empty. Well, I'm there before the day opens. So there's a sign that says valet only. It's empty. I don't see anybody. I start pulling into a parking lot only for someone to run after me. And it's a little jacket saying valet only, valet only. So I back out of the parking spot. I give him my keys. He pulls into the same parking spot that I was in. Whatever. I go upstairs. Stacy gives me the paperwork. I start filling it out. I give her my Humana card. And she tells me, hey, by the way, we don't take Humana. What do you mean you don't take Humana? We confirmed this over the phone. I asked if you took Humana, and you said yeah. And she said, well, I'm sorry. I was focused on the 8:45. Do you want to pay out of pocket? I say no. I go downstairs. I see a little sign that says the first 30 minutes of parking are free. All right, well, I've only been there for 22 minutes. I think I'm okay. I go over to the parking attendant to give the ticket over, and she just walks away. She takes the ticket to the guy in front of me and doesn't take mine. I'm like, what's going on here? Comes back about 5 minutes later. I have 3 left on the clock for those of you counting. And she takes my ticket, walks over. I don't know what happens next, plugs it in. Lo and behold, 31 minutes. Are you serious? I've been waiting here for 10 minutes. You could just do it earlier. What's going on? She said, well, the sign right there says to put the ticket in the bin. Like, I didn't see the sign. Really? Okay, fine. I begrudgingly hand her the $5 bill or whatever it was, and then she takes it, she smirks, and says, tip not included. I could have parked my own car. Tip not included. So I get into my car. I don't give her a tip. I zip off. She says something about left. I didn't really hear her. I go left. I don't know where I'm going. This is the parking lot's a maze. It's in Beverly Hills. I circle around 3 times. I come back. Guess who I have to ask for directions? She got the tip later. I call Yael. I say, sorry, I couldn't actually get the physical in time, but I'm going to try to get it in the near future. And she says, oh, actually, your school called. The physical from your school qualifies. You're good. I mean, Curb Your Enthusiasm episode right there. And it's hilarious in retrospect. At the time, it was moderately frustrating. But all of these could have been solved if we had been on the same page. And we only could have been on the same page if the person communicating the message did so in a way that they knew that the other person was listening. Putting a sign up that says, put the ticket in the bin when you're over there taking tickets, I'm not going to necessarily see that. You need to communicate that. If I really need to make sure that this is done by that they take Humana, I need to ensure, hey, I just want to confirm with you, do you take Humana? And if I get a response that's anytime ambiguous, well, I need to double back. Because communication is not just putting a message that you want them to hear. Communication is saying it in a way that they will understand it. The distance between Goshen and Canaan, the Israelites could have made it there in a matter of weeks. It took them years. It took them years in Egypt to figure out who they were. It took them a few months to receive the Torah, their mission statement, but then it took a generation to coalesce around that mission. This isn't an easy process, but they did make it. And 40 years, thousands of years later, it's a blip on the radar. If we look back from now, 20 years from now, if we look back and we see that we've achieved our goals and we've moved on to new ones, taken a year or 3 to figure out who we are and who we want to be in the future, it'll be more than fine. If we can keep our communication strong, ensuring that we're on the same page, that the message that I'm putting out, that I'm making sure you're receiving, and vice versa, well, we might be wandering the wilderness, but we'll eventually get to the promised land. It's not a straight line, and it'll drive us crazy sometimes, but as long as we know who we are, what we prioritize, allow ourselves to be transformed by the decisions we make and the projects we engage in, we'll get there together. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Let's continue with the Torah reading.
Chatzi Kaddish.
Yeah. Please rise for Chatzi Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, יעמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכם וביומכם ובחייתכם בית ישראל. בגלה